Hello and welcome to today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is where we kind of talk about whatever's in the news or whatever's going on right now. Kind of share a little bit from our perspective as gun rights activists right here in these United States. So today we're going to talk about how heavily armed is your state? In other words, what's the firearm ownership rate in your particular state? Well, CBS News recently did a story, and in this story, they kind of outlined, the gun ownership rates in all 50 states. Now, what they used is data from a list created under the National Firearms Act, which includes the regulation of certain devices and firearms. Not all; it's not a completely exhaustive list. As well as they utilized data from a survey from 2013. And now, once again, and we all know that there are people who probably didn't answer the survey. If they had guns, they probably weren't telling people that they had guns because they don't want the government coming to take their guns. You know what I'm saying? They don't want no census takers coming on in, and you guys get the joke. Anyway, but having said that, and by the way, I don't believe that that's necessarily a bad thing. So let's get into because I think you'll find some of the numbers kind of interesting. So first and foremost, the least heavily armed state would be Delaware, the 51st. They tend to have a firearm ownership rate that is significantly low. Then a couple of other things to note. Not only was Delaware obviously at the bottom of the list, there were a couple that were also at the bottom of the list that I'm sure will not surprise you. New York. Now, part of that has to do with the fact that as populated as they are, the numbers make sense. But secondly, if you also look at the laws there in New York and how strict firearm ownership, firearms are regulated, in particular in the city of New York, which is the most populated area in that state, it's not hard to see why. Now, once again, this also, keep in mind, does not include handguns, doesn't include illegally possessed firearms, which probably would push up their numbers significantly. New Jersey, once again, probably the same thing relating to New York. No surprise that they're here on this list. Surprisingly, California at 43 actually came in a little bit lower on the list in terms of of being armed. But once again, I also happen to believe that a lot of this has to do with the laws, the strictness of laws here in California, and the fact that we're a relatively highly populated state. Now, here's one that interested me. Arizona at 33. I would have expected Arizona to be somewhere near the top. Probably not top 5. Because it's more populated than some of the smaller states, but when you consider the freedom that the residents of Arizona have when it comes to their Second Amendment rights, I would have thought they would have been higher. I would have also thought that Florida would have been higher in terms of their numbers, and they are barely below average. Guys there at Arms Room Radio, you guys are at the Arms Room. You guys need to get to selling some guns, man. We got to get you guys up on this list. Now, here was the biggest shocker. The District of Columbia. District of Columbia was number 2 on the list in terms of arms. Now, keep in mind, this is the place where Heller was fought. This is the place. This is the specific place where where they tried to ban your ability or limit your ability to be able to own a firearm. Well, guess what? It's one of the most heavily armed segments or states or places, whatever you want to call it, districts in this case, in the country. It also happens to have relatively high amount of gun violence. And number 1 on the list, there we go, Wyoming. Wyoming is number 1 on the list in terms of firearm owned per capita. I don't think anyone is surprised about that. Now, one of the things that I would make it a point to point out to you is that if you get a chance to go click on the link and go through the article and look at the list, what you'll find is this. The states that are the least heavily armed tend to have the strictest gun laws. They also tend to have the highest number of incidents of gun violence. there seems to be a direct correlation between the strictness of laws, how many law-abiding people have firearms, and the amount of gun violence that takes place. You and I already know that that's the case because, well, let's just be honest. An armed society is a polite society. But hey, some folks don't. Even though the statistics bear that out, some people just tend to not disagree. Anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please remember to like and share these videos and tell everyone about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.